All right, let's talk about statistics and let's get started on what is statistics all about. And we will keep this at a very high level, whatever is relevant from an exam point of view. As statistics is a very important topic in terms of understanding of the different concepts and in terms of even real life job requirements and stuff like that. But at the same time, it's very dry and it's all about numbers and jargons. So it might be very boring for certain students. So let's keep this interesting and let's keep this very to the point on what is required from an exam standpoint of view. So with that, let's get started on the first chapter, understanding the fundamentals of statistics. And like I said, there is going to be a lot of jargons that statistics use. Maybe that's to throw off other people who normally are very averse and scared for mathematics. But I think I'll get you back on track and you just don't have to worry about the terms. Just focus on what is being taught and just grasp as much as you can. And I assure you that that should be sufficient for you to get over the hump in the examination. All right, there are two important sections in statistics. And however advanced you can think about statistics, that kind of branches off in this from these two topics. The first one is something called as a notion of central tendency. Again, like I said, this is a jargon, central tendency. And once I explain in this video, you'll know that, okay, this was not a big deal. It was just a heavy jargon to overload your brains. And the second concept is something called as measures of variability. That also we will understand in the future videos. Again, a very simple concept, but just an overdose of verbiage in using this jargons, okay? In this video, we'll be talking specifically about the first topic, that is the notion of central tendency. We'll just talk about that. We'll set the stage about what that is. And the subsequent videos, whatever the subtopics are there within this topic, we'll cover over here. And then once we are comfortable with this, then we'll move to a topic number 2, which is measures of variability. Okay, to get started on central tendency, or what does even central tendency mean? What does this two combination of words mean, and how should we think about that, right? What I've done is I've taken some visuals and I'll just throw some visuals and try to explain some real-time examples and try to kind of plant your thinking in that process of where we are getting at, and then define what this particular central tendency is. That way you can attach some numbers, some examples, some visuals to the concept, and that will help you grasp the concepts better. Okay, so let's take it. And just to make it more fun, I've just taken real-time examples because I'm teaching this for the Polytechnic or the Diploma cadre. So I've just taken their examples specifically for the Maharashtra State Board, but this can be applied to pretty much all the other academic syllabus also. Okay, so let's take the visual one. Okay, what is the first example? Over here, I'm putting the marks of an individual student in SEM 1 Diploma, and these are the subjects here, and I'm just putting the marks out of 70 because 70 is the theory marks for offline mode. So I'm just taking that, and hopefully with COVID being subsiding, we'll get the theory paper coming soon starting this summer. Anyway, so I've given the marks for that student for all these subjects, and to give a better impact to that, I've also put some visuals here. A picture is worth 1,000 words. So what I've done is I've taken the same numbers and I've plotted it on the graph here to give a sense of what we're talking about here. Okay, and the question is, let's say I've given you these two things. On the left, I've given you the numbers, and on the right, I've given the visuals. So you can refer to either one of them or both of them, whichever is comfortable to you. But the question that I'm asking is, based on this, or at the left table or on the right side, either of this, the question is, where do you think, where are the marks for this student or for this particular individual for all the subjects? What are the marks are for all the subjects? Where do you think that is getting concentrated at? Or is there a central place where the marks are getting distributed or getting more aligned? Is there a region? That's what I'm asking. For example, if you see here on the left side table, is there any mark range here where you see, okay, most of the marks are around this range, either from that or from the diagram? That's my first question. Can we answer that? You don't have to have a precise answer, but is there a ballpark? Is there a guesstimate? Can you guess, okay, I think around between this and this, I think most of the marks are falling, or stuff like that, okay? The second visual is of a whole class, not of an individual. So I have taken a whole class of say 313 students, just a random number, but the marks are for one subject. So let's say the marks are for maths, okay, because I'm teaching maths for now. So let's say maths, okay. So there's a class, the class has got 313 students, and we are going to talk about maths as a subject. And over here in this table on the left, I've given the marks for each student, and on the left I've given the frequency. That means 3 students out of the 313, for example, 3 out of 313 got perfect score, 100 marks, okay. 10 out of 313 got 90 marks, so on and so forth. So if you add all these things, if you add all the students over here, this will total to 313, total number of students, and these are their mark distribution. And like as always, I've given a visual effect to that, where I've taken a graph and I've plotted this whole table on the left over here. If you see whatever is table on this left, I've plotted on the right. So it's say the same thing. And again, I'm going to ask the same questions, either from the table over here or on the graph on the right. Do we see for the whole class, are there any marks or are there any cluster of marks where you see some concentration? Is there a concentration over in this region, or maybe this region, or maybe this region, or any other region? Is there a bunch of values which are like floating around the central? Is there a central tendency for marks to come together? Is there a cluster? That's another word you can look at that, okay? Is there a guess? So that's another question to spin your minds. And the last example is I've taken is, let's say I've taken the number of students who have failed in each subject in a class. So I'm taking all the students who have unfortunately failed, and how many students have failed in how many subjects in a class. So what does that mean? 140 students have failed in maths, 5 students have failed in communication skills, 72 students have failed in drawing, and so on and so forth. And likewise, I've drawn a visual here to explain the people who have failed in that, or the number of students who have failed in a particular subject in a particular class, okay? And again, I'm asking the same question. Is there a central tendency where you see that more students have failed in a particular subject? Like some subjects have a lot of failures, some subjects have low number of failures, or some subjects have medium. So is there a tendency where the numbers are more concentrated in one zone? That's the question, okay? So what we'll do now is we'll answer all these three. We had 3 visuals, and we're going to answer the 3 questions, and then we'll understand the concept of what is the central tendency, okay? That way we can attach real-time examples to the concept, as opposed to starting to explain the concept first and trying to understand with examples, okay? So what I've done is I've copied and pasted the visuals again, but this time I'm also answering the question. So in the first visual, we were talking about the marks of an individual in semester 1 diploma, okay? Just one individual, but all subjects, okay? And we were asking, where are the marks over here? If you see, I'm just focusing on here. Where are the marks for the subjects above tend to center around? Is there a central tendency? In other words, is there a pattern or a cluster where marks for most of the subjects tend to fall within? So I've just rephrased the same question in different words so that people can understand what we're trying to talk about. And without getting into the perfect calculation, just looking either on this table or on the visual, we can say that I can see some clustering or some concentration around this area, which we can say 40 to 45 marks are the concentration. Or if you see the graph here, there is some concentration going on between these 2 areas, because most of the marks are in that range. This is also getting closer to this. This is getting closer to this. So this particular range, 40, 45, 50, however you want to name, like I said, it's more of a guesstimate right now. You don't have to be precise. We'll come to the precise calculation. But we think that there is a tendency for this student, for this individual, to get marks around this range in general. That's what we're talking about. There's a tendency. That's the cluster. These marks are falling. The same question for the second example, where we're talking about the whole class in general with 313 students for one subject. And if you ask the same question, if you see here, where are the marks for the whole class tend to center around? Is there a place? And you can clearly see from here in this visual, this is the cluster where you see most of the marks are nearby. They're like over here it's very distributed. This is kind of a lone ranger floating around. But if you see here, the marks are kind of concentrated here. So we can say between 40 and 60 over here, between 40 and 60, there seems to be a tendency for the student to get the marks in this cluster or in a concentrated way. Similarly, likewise, for the third examples where we're asking about how many students, number of students who are failed in the subject, we're asking, is there a tendency where more students fail in a particular subject, or is it like it's almost equally distributed? And if you see this over here, and this is pretty much real, most of the students fail in maths for an interesting problem. I don't know why, but most of the students, if you see, they fail in maths. And if you see here, 140 is the number. So we see here that most of the students have a central tendency to fail in maths, and the number is 140 here. So in that case, the question that we are asking here is there a central tendency where more students fail in a particular subject? And the answer is yes. There is a tendency for more students to fail in maths, and it's around 140 because that's the number of students who are here, right? That's what we're talking about. So with that, it kind of gives us a context in a high level what the central tendency could be, and that way we can now define what is the central tendency at a high level, and then we can move on. Okay, so again, I have paraphrased in different words. You can pick up whatever you like, and this is not going to come in an exam. You're never going to get a question that what do you understand by central tendency. This is more of an understanding the basics before you get into the different other terms and other measures. It's good for you to understand this concept. So it's more of a concept. Just keep it from an understanding level. No need to kind of memorize or understand anything. Just enjoy what you learn. That's it. All right. In different ways, we can define now central tendency based on the three examples that we saw about, right? So A, we can say a general tendency of certain numbers or a certain number, it could be one number or it could be many numbers, to be at the center or get distributed or dispersed around the center of a given set of numbers. So again, a lot of jargons here, but these words will keep on coming. For example, distribution, distributed, dispersed. These words will come in statistics, so you need to just get used to do that. Also, kind of given data set of numbers. Now it's very simple. You don't have to just go with get overwhelmed. So whatever you see here, these numbers and these numbers are kind of data set or observations. Okay, data set or observations. Basically, it's the given values, set of values, and the distribution is this chart that you get. You see that in this area the numbers are like scattered or they are distributed in a different way, whereas in this cluster the numbers are more concentrated. So there is a central tendency here. So that's how the central tendency talks about. So if you take all of these numbers put together, or all of these numbers put together, these numbers have a tendency to be centered around this cluster, and that is this area is called as a central tendency, or the area of central tendency. That's what it means. So that's what it means in the first point. Again, kind of rephrasing in different words the same thing. Think of this as a cluster around some center point or a specific area where there is more concentration. That's what we kind of discussed. Or a region where most of the numbers in a given data set fall within or centered or scattered around. That's what we're talking about. The same stuff, you can pick up whichever language is easy for you. But from a technical standpoint, distribution, dispersion, and data set will be the jargons that we'll be using in the future videos. So that's what is central tendency. Okay. And now how do we measure central tendency? Because in the above questions, we had a guesstimate answer. We didn't have the actual measure. We were just guessing to explain the concept of central tendency. But how do you measure central tendency? What is that one value which will define, okay, this is the number. We're not talking about the area. This is the number. For example, here 140 is the number. Okay, so the central tendency is in this area where more students fail. But what is that measure? What is that one number which will define the extent of the central tendency, or which will give a measurement to the central tendency? That's 140 over here. Similarly, over here, we know that this area over here is crowded and there's more concentration of numbers. But what is that one value within this cluster where all the numbers as a whole, not only this, as a whole, all of this are kind of centered? What is the one value in it? It could be in the center, it could be middle. We'll figure out how to determine that. But what is that one value? I don't want the whole area. I want a particular value. And similarly over here, I know that this is the range 40, 45 looks like that's the range, but what is that one number? A group of numbers tell us the central tendency, a general area that looks like this particular area is where most of the numbers are. But what is that one number? If I take this whole graph as one unit, what is that one number, whatever is that x, which seems to be the center of the central tendency or the overall number set or observations? So that particular measure of central tendency is called as average. And we must have used this since our elementary maths a lot of times, and we are used to that. When we say, hey, what is the average score? What is the average marks? What is the average cost? Basically, we know what it means. But what we think is whatever we know about average is the only way average is defined, and that's not true. Any number or any measure of central tendency, however is calculated, there are different ways to calculate that, and we will discuss that. All of them collectively or individually is called as an average, okay? But typically when we use average, we use only one sort of method comes to our mind, and we'll talk about that. So there are many ways to measure central tendency, but from a syllabus standpoint, there are 3 ways that we'll be focusing on, and these are the 3 most common measures. The first one is called as mean. This is the first one, mean, arithmetic mean or mean. The second one is called as median, and the third one is called as mode. In the future videos, we'll be discussing each one of them in detail, but these are the 3 measures, important measures. I'll not say all inclusive, but these are some of the 3 important measures of how to measure central tendency. And typically all these are nothing but averages, okay? All these are different sorts of average only. But typically when in real time we talk about, hey, what is the average cost of this? What is the average speed? What is the average distance? What is the average marks? We're typically talking about this mean, the arithmetic mean, where if there are 3 values, let's say 1, 2, and 3, and if you want to take the average of this, we will say 1 plus 2 plus 3, and we'll divide the whole thing by 3 because we have got 3 values, and then we get this is 5 plus 1, 6 by 3, and the average is 2. So typically we'll say the average is 2, and when we say average, we're talking about mean, and we think that this is what average is all about. But even when we say about median, that's also a form of average to measure central tendency. When we talk about mode, that's also an average to measure central tendency. So all these are different measures of central tendency, and collectively they are called as average. But typically in real life, when we say average, we always think about mean. So I just wanted to make that we understand that that's the context, okay? And each of these particular measures of central tendency, this 1, 2, and 3, have a different way to calculate, or they are calculated in a particular way. And based on whatever is the number, we get a different value based on how do you want to apply that. There are some instances where you want to apply mean because that makes sense. There are some instances where you want to apply median because that makes sense. And there are some instances where you want to apply mode, and that makes sense. And we'll talk about each one of them using the same 3 examples. And there is a reason I took these 3 examples, because each one of them kind of will tie back to one of these measures that we're talking about, and that will help. So that's what I wanted to bring this as kind of setting the stage before we get into previous videos of how to use mean, median, and mode. And a quick visual over here before we wrap up this topic is, in this video we understood what is a central tendency, and there are out of the many ways, there are 3 important ways or 3 important averages that we need to understand as a measure of central tendency, or how to calculate that one number which will talk about the central tendency. And that's mean, the first one, the second one is median, and the third one is mode. And we'll talk about the details of each one of them in separate videos, and I'll see you in the other videos. Hopefully this was a good fundamental discovery for you guys before we move into the other topics of statistics.